Good afternoon. My name is James Little from Mass Spec Interpretation Services. This is a demo of using the peak picking mode in MS Expert of Wiley 2025 KnowItAll software. I will assume that you've already watched the deconvolution video in the software because many of the things that I'm using here are repeated in that video, and probably I will do more things in detail in that previous video. So the first thing we'll do is open up the file here. We'll open up the CDF file. It's a GCMS file. And remember that we use MS Expert now. A process that is not used for GCMS data anymore in version for the 2025 version. So let's open a file. Notice I already had a file open, VG1 at the bottom. So you have tabs here. You can have multiple files open that you can go back and forth from. But while we're talking about this, it essentially took all of the peaks in the chromatogram, deconvoluted them to look for overlapping peaks, background subtracted them, and searched 1.2 million library files or library spectra in 20 libraries and gave the results up on the right-hand side of the pane here. So it's a very fast process. So you can click through those and see it. But what we'll do now, instead of doing the deconvolution, we'll just switch over. We'll go up here to the top where it says peak picking and open that up. And when it does peak picking, what it does is it goes to the top of every peak and gets a spectrum. It does not try to deconvolute anything, and it doesn't background subtract. But it does do the search of 1.2 million spectra in the libraries in 20 different libraries and give you the results on the right side up here. So it looks in many ways similar to the ones that we got for this particular file using peak picking and deconvolution. And as before, we can step through these by using the arrows on our keypad. Step down one on the arrow, it goes to the next one, et cetera, et cetera. And at the bottom, you'll see the raw spectrum, and you'll see the best hit in the library. I don't use this middle pane very much that shows the real-time spectrum, so I'll just push it up to give me a little bit more room here. And remember from the other video, I set up the window over here under View to look at this structure here in the pane. It's just better because sometimes it overlaps down here. So this is just a better way to view it. So that's already done. We ought to make sure that the settings are correct. So let's go to settings. Just make sure our library is correct. It's doing everything above 30%, it will report. Number of hits for each entry will be, or each component in the chromatogram will be 10. And we'll filter out peaks that are less than 5%. And that's these peaks on the side. So if you wanted to change that to maybe filter out everything less than 10%, you thought that would be adequate, you can just say apply, and you'll see that the number decreases over here. So you say OK to that. The other thing is we'll check that we're doing all the libraries. This is all the libraries that I have licenses for. I think there's 20, and there's 1.2 million spectra in those libraries. So say OK. So that's pretty much that. And remember, if you step through them, you can always use the right arrow to open up and show the 10 best hits if you want to. If you decide you don't want to see those, just go up to the top and hit the left arrow again. You can send them to a list and mine it if you want to see it in maybe in a different display. You like this display better for looking at the results. To go back to the other display, hit previous application. We're back to the other display. If you decided you didn't want to report that, you could right click and say remove selected component. You could do that so it didn't report out in your PDF file that you wrote to either for yourself or for your customer. So that's handy. The other thing is you can look at the bottom here, include range bar. So if you see a bar below either a chromatogram or a spectrum, it means that you can do something. So as you go into, you'll see it changes from a hand to a little different cursor. Let's say we didn't want to see the solvent and we didn't want to see this lift in the background on the right. So let's just take the center, left click and drag. And so it took those other ones out. They're no longer included in the results. So it cleaned it up a good bit. Let's also let's do the area percent. The area percent is done automatically when you do deconvolution, but in peak picking, you have to do it manually. So you go to View, Peak Area, Table, and say Automatic Integration, and say Preview. And it's got all the values calculated, and we'll say Replace. So when we close it, you'll see that these values, uh, I was hoping it would get rid of these on the side, but it didn't. It gave you the values in the middle, but I don't think it will add up to 100%. Been better if we had left those out. I guess you go back and edit the area table and remove those so that you wouldn't have that in your report, but it didn't take it out automatically. So that's how you do area percent. You see it shows you the integrals here and what the interval adds up to. So that's how you do area percent. The other thing is over on the side now, we can look for things that like, let's look for an ethyl ester. This is an ethyl ester here. I know that is from previous results. And you can see it's got a big 88 ion, and that's for the CH3COO ethyl group. And so every ethyl ester will have an 88 ion. So if we come down to mass chromatogram, you see our cursor changes again from a hand to actually a different type cursor. And let's also go up to the top here and turn on our, that's called the crosshair. It makes it easier when you click on something, you can see where it extends up to. So I'll click and drag to get the 88 ion, and it put in the selected ion chromatogram for this mass range here, and it overlaid it with the chromatogram. So it's somewhat difficult to see here. So what we need to do is look at it in a different way. So we come up to the top here, and we go to stack mode. Now you've got it separated, but it's a little bit too small there to see the small intensity of smaller components. So let's go to scale independently. I'm up here on the top again. And now we can see them very well. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 ethyl esters in the sample that we can easily find by looking at the 88 ion. So you can make that go away if you want to just by clicking deselecting it. It's still there. You could have just picked 88 in one of the ions, but it didn't show it. Well, here it is, 88. You would have gotten the same thing, but I just wanted to show you how to use the bar at the bottom. You can, of course, these ions and these selected ion chromatograms can be sorted in different ways. You can add things manually if you want to by typing it in, or you can delete things. So it's a very functional way to get selected ion chromatograms up to find things. So I think that's what's looking at my list to make sure I've got everything. Um, oh, one last thing, the threshold setup. There's some small peaks here. So if you wanted to try to pick those up in your report, you can go over to this bottom bar here where you set the sensitivity. And what you do is you just take it off automatic and then slide the bar around to get what you wanted to get. So there's there's lots of ways to adjust this if you wanted to try to pick up the bottom ions, but I'll leave that for you to try yourself on some of your files. So I think that's pretty much it. The only other thing you might want to expand things to look at little things, you need to right click and say box zoom mode, scan across it. Now you can look at smaller peaks if you wanted to. To get back out of that, you have to go zoom out. And then always it's best to go back into the selection mode. So when you're clicking on things, such as picking boxes to jump between the spectra manually instead of using your arrow keys, then it will be a select option. So that's pretty much everything you need to know about peak picking. It's just another way to process things. And we have one last one, which will be manual processing. We've gone through in another video, deconvolution, and the next one we'll discuss is manual. So I hope you find this useful. Good day.